Humans are deeply socio-cultural creatures, she says. They are full of potential for learning and inventing. But what does it take to make them use that potential? What is life on Earth supposed to look like and feel? And how can technological progress and innovation help societies to bounce forward from this crisis, right into a development paradigm fit for the 21st century? Some of the questions Maja Göpel is going to address now. Resilient societies and the purpose of technological progress. Maja Göpel, ladies and gentlemen.
I would really like to congratulate you, because one of the primary concerns I've had in recent years that there was a notion of juxtaposing sustainability and innovation. And it culminated in a discussion that we had in Germany that the innovation principle shouldn't be trumped by the precautionary principle. And I was thinking, whoa, now we really want to start talking about what we mean when we talk about innovation. And obviously we had a long discussion about how we can get out of sustainability problems through technological process. And this is really, really important. We've seen major leaps forward when we talk about more efficient use of our resources and alternative ways of communicating, for example, as we have today. And yet, in my function of the General Secretary of the Advisory Council on Global Change, we have, for example, written a big report, which took us almost 3 years, very interdisciplinary, to try to get a grip on the two big transformations that we basically have going on right now, the digital transformation and the sustainability transformation, and to see how we could, at best, use that powerful new toolkit, basically, of things that we're inventing to actually solve the problems that we know are long there, and we have long witnessed them, and they're really in the firm rubric of life on this planet. And this is what I've been trying to say on and on now. And I think the corona crisis has shown this. We really start talking about what is it that human existence is made of. It is humans and it is the planet, because we're biological beings. And so life on this planet really depends on the way that humans interact with what we've been given as ecosystems, and to make sure that their possibility of becoming very innovative in regenerating all the things like water circuits or a stable atmosphere or biodiversity, so that we still have pollination going on to make us have food available. So all of those fantastically developed ways of producing a wealth of natural capital for us, not to interfere with those too much, so that we don't risk losing them. And that's been a huge, I think, breakthrough in the recent years, that we've come from talking about sustainability as something that people said felt a bit like inhibiting. Oh, we have to get to grips with the limits of nature, have to cut back, have to clamp down, we have a big debate still about have to not live the good life anymore because that stupid planet is limited. And we've really come into understanding that what we're trying to do when we're marrying the social and the ecological as a progress ideal and try to invent everything that helps us harmonize those two developments, we're actually putting people's well-being at the core of the development paradigm, and which is what, for example, the preamble says from the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations that were adopted in 2015. It's about the well-being of people. We have it in Article 3 in the Lisbon Treaty. But that does mean, and we've only had this now with the German Verfassungsgericht, so our highest court, saying this does include the well-being of future generations. And there, obviously, we're straight into why some of the sustainability scholars are talking about the Anthropocene now, because we are many now on this planet, many people, which is a success criterion in itself, because deaths have been reduced, longevity has been become better, and we have really also had a huge progress in health and support to that. But now we are risking that particular health again by really intruding, that's been the coronavirus, into the territories of biodiversity, limiting the space where viruses can park in animals, so they'll jump over onto humans. So we've come back to understanding that this Anthropocene actually means that we are nature. And some discourses still go in the direction that we make nature, which is very interesting. And this is one of the aspects I want to talk about today, that the making of history is what humans are up and about to. But that means we should be cautious with the way that we look at the world and with the way that we think is possible, what is desirable, and what seems plausible when we look at different futures. And I find it really interesting to see how differently this is looked at. Some are saying, oh, great, humans make nature, let's go. And others are saying, oof, maybe we become a bit more humble and we understand that this is such a complex system that we might use our understanding to embed the solutions that humans make into that well-functioning organism. I have to disclose I'm more in that latter camp because I haven't seen human inventions to be able to copy ecosystems. It hasn't happened yet. I'm not saying it can't happen in the future, but as long as it becomes very complex, we did not have successful replications under a tarp or in a big tent that can create the same kind of life and persistence of life. And this is why I find today it is so important to come forward to saying, when we talk about recovery, when we talk about using also the corona crisis as a kind of wake-up moment to say, where do we want to go? And using a lot of money and also saying we have to orientate our research and development in a particular direction. Where do we want to build to? And at least we've seen that in Germany, there's a lot of building back. I think the COP now in the UK has the slogan building back better to say how can we get out of climate change developments, but it still has a building back in it. And I think it is important to understand that looking at what worked before might be part of the problem, why we don't really solve the sustainability issues that we've known for so long. And the other element is I've just done a Google search on innovation, what comes up when you just put in the term innovation in image search. And it looks a lot like this. So innovation is very much associated with technological change. But we've seen a lot of research coming out saying that social and cultural innovations are really, really, really important when we think about what is that good life that people aspire to, because that's how they're going to consume, that's how they're going to invest, that's how they're going to desire living. So do we really want to just go that way, or do we want to see how a different way of that where we want to build to might look like? Because our images are guiding us. And this is one of the charts I've been using a lot when I was still facing the discourse where people say, oh, these soft issues, we can't really take ecological concerns so serious. It happened again after Corona, and they said, now we're really down with our economy. You can't come forward with those soft issues because now we have to focus to get back on jobs, get back on growing the economy. But this is the World Economic Forum's global risk reports. And when you see why it is important to understand that this is not a soft issue, but actually the basis of life in the future of biological beings like we are, I use this table to just say, look, and it's been in the last 10 years that the environmental issues have been moving up a lot. And on the international realm, on the UN level, there's a lot of discussion, especially when you talk to representatives from the global south that don't necessarily use the term sustainable development, but disaster risk reduction strategies. There is this both. It's an aspiration, say, let's get to achieving those goals of sustainable development. There's also an avoidance aspect. And I think we have to also be clear, and Mr. Timmermans has been saying this, I think about last week or the week before, that the European continent is quite small for the amount of people that we have. We're very dependent on other parts of the world, both for the input into our industrial systems, but also for the exports. And giving some of the geopolitical, it's eased up now, but geopolitical dimensions recently, it also just really makes a lot of sense to say, let's go towards circularity, let's go towards decarbonization, and really make sure that we make the best of all the resources that we have, also within our territories, and also stop exporting all the waste into other parts of the world. And it was one of the most striking images for me with the border shut now, that industry in Germany started thinking more about, oh, how can we recycle better? How can we get this going? Just because the waste was stuck on the border. So it couldn't get, in the German term is wegwerfen. So it's like throwing it away. Yeah, it's the same thing. But where is away? Away tends to be an ocean, tends to be a soil, tends to be children's hands somewhere. So we started understanding that away is not gone, it's somewhere. And this allows for us to start thinking in systems much better. And this is where I think we really need to look at when we're talking about building sustainable and resilient futures. And now I want to go into a bit of work that I've been doing in my English publication, which has been a scientific book called The Great Mind Shift, where I was trying to answer these two questions and where I came to look at the agency of why our ways of looking at the world are at the core of really driving a transformation into a purposeful direction. It was grappling with the tagline of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda in 17 goals, because it is transforming our world. And yet when I started going into transformation research, basically everyone said, we can't really say how to unfold a transformation in a complex system. It's always going to be some of the unintended behavior. There's always going to be uncertainty. There are always going to be tipping points where all of a sudden you're going to have much quicker developments as you would have anticipated. And so how do we still work towards that quality was one of the questions, even though if we don't know if it's going to be transformative change or after what period of time. But how is that intentionality possible? And then what is the key leverage point to unlock path dependencies of keeping us out of sustainable development, to think about how we can accelerate in comparison to the past when we're really saying the transformation should serve sustainable development. And this is why I've put forward an ontology from a social sciences point of view, very constructivist point of view, to say, how does everything that we call reality today emerge? And that's the fantastic history of human, well, ingenuity, basically, of putting things together. And it does start, from my point of view, with that sense-making actors, our intentionality of inventing something to achieve something. And that obviously is guided by our values, beliefs, knowledge, and worldviews. And this you can map when you go back historically, what kind of inventions were going hand in hand with different behavior, with aspirations. And obviously the Enlightenment phase, especially in the European context, was one area where both the way that we thought about things, including the nature-human relationship, about using fossil energies to build machines to really kind of subordinate nature and its capricious ways of dealing with providing or not providing, and that allowed for lots of development. But it is a different way of looking at the relationship between nature and humans than we might now look at when we look at it from a more complex systems point of view, whereas some worldviews, like indigenous worldviews, have held, where it was much more the co-living between different types of life. But we end up creating those processes. And this is where I think the system thinking is so important, to look at the relationships, not only the elements. So also when we talked about digitalization, for example, to say it has to be looked at as a social technical system embedded in the planet. Because that was important to me as well, to say we can't really see that much of the data floating around. A lot of things are intangible to us, but still there's a hardware. There's something that needs to power the transmission of what we're doing right now. So there is an energy system there, and there's resources that are being built into the hardware, harvesting the kind of data so we can use it as information. So always to understand how those relationships are being built and how they come to something like we call socio-ecological technical systems that then have a life of their own. We can't just say, oh, we're just going to make the infrastructure go away by tomorrow because we rethink it. So the human freedom that I'm talking about is very patterned. We're embedded into the systems that we've built, into the things that we call normality. That used to be that way, that seems kind of normal. But we're also anticipating. So we have the ability to see how developments change, to challenge our ways of thinking about possibly the good life, for example. And this is why I find one of the terms or sentences by Karl Marx really summarizing it well, that humans make their own history, but under the circumstances transmitted from the past. And that's obviously where the transformation terminology comes in, because it does say we have to reconfigure a lot of those systems. And it can be a technological innovation, it can be a social innovation. At best, they kind of coalesce around really updating the ways we've been doing things. But who is doing the updating? Who is making the decision to create what kind of technology, to invent what kind of investment scheme, to say we could do this differently? That is us. And this is why I find it really important, even though some of the descriptions, when you talk about transformation, it's about the diffusion of knowledge, the cascading of innovations. So it's a very technical way of describing how things change. But in the end, it is people making choices in their everyday lives that is going to diffuse an idea or is going to make an innovation be applied. And this is how we can reclaim a bit where we want to go. And we can say, what counts as the way forward? So what have been part of that in the question too, part of the past dependencies that made it so difficult for sustainable outcomes to emerge? And to me, it is part of the economics way of looking at what is desirable development. This is also a Google image search. And when you look at success, progress, development, the bottom terms are more logical because they're very economic terms anyway. But it's always been the same curve that we've been seeing in the Anthropocene. So more is always better, measured in money. But we don't always put the value of things in the money indicator correctly. And this means that we've created a lot of unsustainable development when you look at it now with the warning signs, whilst, for example, GDP has been growing the whole time. So the question is, how do we change the key performance indicators so that we come towards sustainable innovations? And that's basically my last examples, to really look at what are the incentives that we're using that are guiding our innovation. When you say we want to have a lot of wood production and you organize subsidy schemes in that direction, this is what likely forests are going to look in the future, because it's fast growing wood, monocultures, producing a lot of wood per square meter, but not very resilient towards climate change. When you say, let's pay for CO2 storage, like we do on the RED+ system, for example, it will be a lot of CO2 harvesting happening, but you're going to probably prioritize the kind of plants that are very good at this. It doesn't necessarily mean they fit into the biodiversity circuits where they're being built. It doesn't necessarily mean that they won't suck up the rest of water. So we've seen a lot of planting trees in the wrong places. And this one, for example, might be the outcome if you say we're incentivizing for payments for ecosystem, or with payments for ecosystem services, which include water, which include a building up of the soil fertility. And this is why I think a lot of where we might want to look for innovation is in the incentive schemes and in the ways that we describe the goals where we want to go for then get innovating across the system. So change the mindset. What are the vision, goals, collective action? How do we really measure this well? Then go into what are the incentives? We're having a lot of discussions on this in the advisory council as well, that the people coming from digital saying we don't really have it in the ways that we are being asked, that we're getting grants for innovation, that this is part of what we should be looking at. We're still battling for social and cultural innovation to be married to the technological innovations. And then we can start looking at where do we actually go and how do emergent innovations feed off each other so we get towards the transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maja Göpel. We are a little short on time, but I have one question for you from the audience. The question is, should technology and research focus on pushing the boundaries, discovering new possibilities, or rather on should they rather focus on educating people, finding practical applications for the current state of the art? And the question is even more explained a little bit. Are universities of technology the source of solutions for our challenges, or do they create the challenges by enabling the students to push the boundaries with limited attention to their impact on society? So do we enable students actually to create challenges because they don't pay too much attention to their impact on society? So what are universities of technology there for? What do they do?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I'll stop this so that we can actually talk to each other better. I can't speak for the universities, right? Because I don't know, I can only kind of mirror the kind of discussions I've witnessed here. And what I've heard, at least in also the kind of departments that I've been trained in, is that the whole Bologna reform, for example, has made it really tough for people to still feel very free and experiment themselves on their way of doing things. So it's been much more that the curriculum has actually limited innovation and creativity to a certain degree by pushing the speed and by limiting what you can actually fit in. Mm-hmm. So compared with the time where I was studying, where I just had superfluous time go bartending, which was great as kind of balancing feedback loop to all that cognitive work. But I could also travel, go to different universities and really immerse in change processes, which is what I always did, to use my knowledge and to listen to what's helpful out there. and to listen what's the real problems that people were facing. I was working on world trade in that area. What were they facing? What was their criticism? Why did they think that these kinds of rules were not helping them? So also there I looked at institutions as kind of enabling mechanisms, as human innovations to make us achieve things. So for me, this going back and forth between listening to practitioners, or we call them pioneers in transformation research, that try to bring out something different, and then go back to thinking about it and back to thinking what would help, and then look at where is the innovation actually. And so I also think that we need both. We need to talk about really where do we want to go and where are those hard limits. And it's really difficult still in the political discourse. It's really shied away from, and this is where I think science has a role to play, because they're all about relative improvements. But to say here is actually something that we shouldn't overstep. That was the court that said there is a particular budget of CO2 emissions, and we have to backcast from that and say all our innovations have to help us stay within that trajectory. And then it's both, I think, really becoming very good at living within those limits, but also to say, how do we want to live differently so that we can imagine a wholly different way, that it doesn't feel so much like limits anymore. And renewable energies are one of the areas where you can say we're maybe able to get out of them because we're completely jumping into a new system of providing for energy.